So, hi everybody, I'm Joy Vernon, and I'm the organizer for the Greater Seattle Tarot Meetup. And today we are here to talk about the Leo Decans, and we are looking at the decanic images as well as the tarot cards that match with that, which are the 5, 6, and 7 of Wands. So, John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Okay. Okay, my name is John Allen. I am the organizer for both Denver Tarot Meetup and Denver Tarot Geeks, for which this is a joint operation with Greater Seattle Astrology, Tarot, etc. Our topic this month is Leo, and we're talking about specifically the decanic imagery of Leo. For those of you who may have missed previous uh, previous episodes, I guess you could say. Last month we were talking about cancer, and just kind of like just to maybe do a little comparison contrast with what we did talk about the energy, kind of the energies that we were involved in last month, because we have a very stark contrast. To see with cancer, the whole strategy was about going into the inner life and getting all that sorted out and perfected. And here with Leo is a total 180. You're going from water to fire. You're going from inner to outer life. And you're going to that sense of a development of the personality, the ego, and um, it's basically a celebration of the self is when it comes to Leo. It's like, this is who I am. This is what I do. I guess, but we just do a very minor overview of the sign, being as we're not really doing, we don't have enough time to really go through the sign itself, but the characteristics of the sign should become more evident as we go through each of the decans, because the decans describe the little finer points of those personality contours. So, is there anything else you'd like to add, Joy, or before we go into our exploring our imagery?
No, I mean I think that's good. I think that maybe as a little teaser, when you and I were prepping last time, I th I realized that it became really interesting to look at our three decans as three different types of kings, because Leo is often associated with the king, and the three different decans seem to clearly describe three different ways of ruling. And so Leo can be about the self and our like active, bright, shining, outward directed qualities. But it also has that sense of authority, rulership, leadership, and that kingship. And so that's just something else to kind of keep in mind as we move forward.
True. And you can use, and if you do feel totally uncomfortable with the king relationships, I mean, you could also say, well, these are, the celebrities are our modern heroes, and those are the people who generally show up in a Leo uh, personality profile. They just have a very strong Leo component to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's another really good keyword for Leo is being in the spotlight or being dramatic. So yeah, really good point.
Okay. So for those of you who have not done this before, I mean, we follow a fairly uh, well-regimented routine here as far as our approach. What be doing is looking at 6 different images for each of the decans, each of them described by a different author from a different time and from a different culture. and we cross comparison those. We do a little bit of imagination ourselves by looking at the description of the item first before we actually see a rendering of it, which is important for when you want to work with the decanic imagery, because you have to be able to hold that image in your mind and be able to work with it in a way that really treats it as being alive and spirited, but not just something that you've pictured in your mind's eye. And then we're going to do a short meditation exercise where we'll scry an image of our own by concentrating on a blank space surrounded by the images that we've looked at. And then, of course, we're going to be picking an author at random and comparing them to the small cards that we're going to that are correspond with these decans. In the course of the entire series, we'll be going through every one of the last of the minor arcana. So why not why not get going with these imageries? If I can get on board here with the share. So is ruled our first decan is ruled by Saturn, also known as the Lord of Strife. That's the Tarot title. This is a decan that focuses a massive attention on one particular person or point. It's is in Austin Coppock's book. He uses the archetype of the spotlight in order to highlight what this decan is really all about. It is, in one sense, if you think of this as the career vector of an entertainer, this is, their first fledgling outings in public view, and trying to jockey for that particular, point of attention amidst several other contenders. So part of that Saturnian aspect of this particular decan comes from that it creates a state of confrontation and strife, competition, and it hardens appearances into reality. It makes them, very, very real things for us to deal with rather than just ideals. The person who uses this decan then crafts their appearance to suit a more favorable outcome. So it is in essence dealing with the persona, that outward interface between your inner life and your outer life, and also used for for the proverbial rising to the top of the heap and increasing charisma. So we'll go through our 6 images. First, we'll have a written description to imagine, and then we're going to have an AI version. The first image is from Abraham ibn Ezra. A large tree on whose branches there is a dog and a vulture, and a man wearing pretty clothes, though dirty, and he is about to hit his father. Our next image comes from the Picatrix, a man dressed in filthy garments, and there ascends with him a figure of a lord of the horse, looking toward the north. And his figure is like the figure of a bear and the figure of a dog. And this is the face of strength, liberality, and victory. Our third image of the Decan is Hieroglyphs, a man riding a lion. It signifies boldness, violence, cruelty, wickedness, lust, and labors to be sustained. Fourth image from Giordano Bruno, a man of ruddy complexion who wears saffron garments and a crown of gold. He is riding a lion and holding a rooster in one hand. Fifth image comes from Aleister Crowley, a man in sordid raiment, and with him a nobleman on horseback, accompanied by bears and dogs. And lastly, we have the image from Austin Coppock, a most recent one, and it goes with simply the spotlight. So now we will pull back and consider all six of these imageries with the goal of scrying our own magical image from the Decan, considering that it is also it's Leo uh, ruled by Saturn with the overall ruler of the sun, and mixing those two rulerships together. So we'll take a few moments and we'll just concentrate on the blank space in that image. Keep the other six images in your peripheral vision and allow an image to surface. And if anyone would like to uh, start a discussion, maybe discuss what what imagery you encountered, or if you have anything to comment on about the imagery that we have before us right now, here's a good time to do it.
I thought it was interesting in terms of exploring some of the uh, relationship between these between the sign and the decanic ruler. So we're in Leo, which is ruled by the sun, but this decan is Saturn. And the very first Ibn Ezra image said something like he was wearing fine garments, though dirty, or something like that. I don't
Yeah.
remember the exact words. And so I think that the fine garments are that solar kind of Leo, I want to show off, I want to look good, but Saturn is the dirty part. And we kind of lose some of that going into the Picatrix. Um, Although I think they didn't bring out the underlying fine quality of it. And then, of course, those get picked up later with Agrippa and Bruno. And it goes much more towards the Leo energies. I was really impressed with Crowley's wording. This is so typical of Crowley, but he said sordid raiment. And raiment is such a perfect word because it has the syllable ray in it, and ray is that ray of light that is that sunny Leo brightness. And he was able to do that in just two words, give us the dirty part as well as the bright part. So I thought that was a particularly nicely phrased Crowley-esque wording. I think some of the things that talked about wickedness or hard work or a lot of difficulties ahead, I think again that's like a solar Leo type of person coming into a Saturnian situation that causes them to have to do physical work or lose some of their noble power and get their hands dirty, so to speak.
Or to engage in, perhaps some acts that may not necessarily agree with their principles in order to gain that moment in the spotlight. It's because, again, and you can look at this a couple of ways too. We've got our king, our entertainer analogy, but we also have our king's analogy that Joy had mentioned, and this is the Saturnian rulership aspect of it, the harder, more uh, tough love, I guess, kind of rulership that Saturn is so fond.
Yeah, and we had explored the idea of the Saturnian king being one, could be just an old king, that maybe doesn't have the strength or power anymore, um, to really do the work that's needed of ruling. Um, and and there can certainly be a lot of experience with that, but a lot of times the experience and wisdom does tend to like go on over to Jupiter, which is our next decanic ruler. And so and the other thing about with the Saturn king is that he might be a king that's much more protective. He's more conservative. He doesn't want to get involved in a fight because he's not confident about winning it. And so he builds a stronger fortress, keeps people safer. Um, we we ended up comparing it to the story of um, oh, I'm gonna forget, John. You have to help me
Mm.
out. Theoden. Theoden in the Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and that he was because of worm tongue kind of sucking his energy dry or something, he was very old, unable to see clearly, unable to know what was going on in his own kingdom. But then later he has to take everybody and hide his whole kingdom in Helm's Deep to try to keep them protected from an army that's just overwhelmingly large. And so he does have that in those two examples, he has that really nice Saturnian examples of how a king might be that has a Saturnian quality. He actually gets to show us the other two qualities as well, which is why he's such a good example.
I think, yeah, it's not just a strict progression either in that case. That he goes from, Saturnian to Jupiterian to Martian. I think he exhibits all three of those characteristics in the whole development of his character.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything to comment on regarding that Saturnian quality?
Or just images that came up when you were scrying. Okay, so Deborah says when I look at and integrate the pictures, I see the self and the shadow self. Oh, really, really nice. Good. And this with the stage signifying the persona and the struggle between self and the shadow self. And that spotlight image is such, man, that just like highlights the self and it also really strengthens the shadow, doesn't it? Nice, nice. I love that.
It's also,
That gives us a lot to think about.
it also should be mentioned that the word persona is basically, they think it's the Greek, it comes from the Greek word that means mask. So their personas are our public masks. The faces that we show are, the outside world, and which differ from our own private worlds that we're most comfortable with. But this is a way to our in this in terms of Leo as a way to increase one's influence in that world and be able to use the persona in that fashion.
And that goes back to the contrast John was mentioning earlier in terms of last month was Cancer ruled by the moon, and the moon a lot of times is that more internal aspect of ourselves that is our comfort zone. And now we're into Leo ruled by the sun, and that makes more sense. It can be the self. This persona idea that we do have to put on a persona to go out into the world. And people that have the sun and moon together or working strongly together, a lot of times their persona and their inner self are more aligned. And depending on basically the moon phase that they were born under, sometimes those things can be very different.
Okay. Well, what we can do now is we'll go into our one-to-one comparison. We're going to choose one of these authors and compare it to these Minor Arcana card, which is associated with this decan, which is, of course, that's the Five of Wands. We're going to randomly choose Giordano Bruno's imagery. And this one is of the man of ruddy complexion who wears the saffron garments and a crown of gold, riding a lion with a rooster in his hand. And for our easy comparison's sake, we are using these Rider-Waite Smith versions of these illustrated minors, since most people will be familiar with them.
And I just want to point out the Bruno and it was Agrippa both had the lion, but this Bruno one in particular is extremely solar. I mean, the ruddy complexion, which is the redness in the face, and red can be associated with Mars, but it also just can be like the energy and excitement, which is a fiery thing, which we get with the sun, or it can literally be a sunburn. Saffron garments, the yellow color associated with the sun, the crown of gold, the metal gold is associated with the sun, the lion is associated with the sign of Leo. The rooster is a symbol of the sun.
Yeah.
Which crows at dawn, announcing the sun. And so we have so much of this solar and Leo energy expressed here. We're missing maybe um a little bit of the Saturnian influence, but if let's see, it would be if we were using the triplicity rulers, it would be Mars for this decan. Um, right? No, it starts with the decan itself, so it would be the sun, right, John?
Yeah. So there's that aspect of things as well. Like sometimes our imagery pays lip service to other rulership systems. So in this case, you might have been looking at the other triplicity things and focusing more on solar symbolism. Monica, you had a question.
I was just gonna say it's looking at the two side by side, the pageantry of the Five of Wands just screams. I mean, I know it can be conflict and arguments and things like that, but it also is just an incredibly choreographed looking fight. So next to that Bruno image with the king on such a grand display, with the sun shining down like that, it just really screams of the pageantry and theatrics in the Five of Wands.
I love that. I totally agree. The guy on the left, somebody described him once to me as like the drum major at the parade, holding that wand straight up and being like, "Okay, we're keeping the time, we're keeping the beat, march, everybody!" And he just really he even has that yellow shirt on. He really kind of captures that Bruno energy going in and saying, "Okay, guys, get ready. It's about time to start. We got to get organized here or something."
Another thing that came to mind, this is a bit shallow, I guess. I've never even seen this, but it just brings to mind like those talent contest TV shows where you've got an act which is being witnessed and judged by somebody. And it's all that now that activity when the five is the act, and this is what they're doing is again supposedly a well choreographed piece of theater where and then they have this guy with the rooster comes in and says, "Oh, that's all right." But you got to work on this and this and this.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
It's maybe the apparent look of disorganization in the Five of Wands is one of those things that kind of cries out for that Saturnian energy to be introduced and saying, "Look, we need a plan. We need to structure this. We need to." It's not every man for himself in this case. It's more like what is um, the bigger goal we want to achieve.
Yeah, that makes really good sense.
I guess we will move on to our second decan. And we'll be doing the same relative procedure here. We'll be going in there in our second decan. The rulership, as we had mentioned earlier, is now with Jupiter in this particular case, and it's known esoterically as the Lord of Victory. This decan aims to sustain the conjunction between appearance and spirit that was that was established in the first decan. In the first decan, it was basically finding that initial face that works for you as a persona. And here, with that Jupiter rulership, is petitions to more of a, conditions of success and victory rather than conflict and discord that we had in the five. With that Jupiter rulership comes that classic imagery of illustration of the triumph processions that were held in Rome and whatnot, where the victor of a successful military campaign paraded around the Colosseum with the crowds, cheering them on. But the ceremony would always culminate into the celebrants making a sacrifice to the temple of Jupiter as a means of, keeping that particular victory energy alive. And like I was saying before, the traditional imagery may have been a military figure or something that had to do with war, but these days our Leonine uh, people tend to be more, in the film, in the, industry of the entertainment or in politics or whatnot, where people are clamoring to get your attention. And it's, you can use this decan for connecting your creative power in an area which you want to excel. So we'll go again with our six authors. First, Ibn Ezra, a man whose nostrils are fine. On his head there is a shape of a crown of white myrtle and a bow in his hand. He is fierce like a lion in his anger, and he is wrapped in a cloak that looks like a lion. Next, we have from the Picatrix, a man with a crown of white myrtle on his head, and in his hand an arrow. And this is the face of beauty, of a man ignorant and common, who will mount and ride. And this is a face of war and bared swords. The third image comes from Heinrich Agrippa, a man with hands lifted up, and a man on whose head is a crown. He hath the appearance of an angry man, and one that threateneth, having in his right hand a sword drawn out of the scabbard, and in his left a buckler. It hath signification upon hidden contentions and unknown victories, and upon base man, and upon the occasions of quarrels and battles. Bruno's image is a woman walking backwards and forwards in the heavens with her hands outstretched. Near her is a man wielding a drawn sword and carrying a great shield, ready for vengeance. Crowley's image is a man crowned with a white myrtle wreath, holding a bow. Gnostic Austin Coppock's version is simply a crown of laurels. And now we have all six again, plus our blank meditation space. So we'll take a few moments now to consider a new image or a personal image, going with this decan that was ruled by Jupiter. So we'll come back to discussion.
I had kind of an interesting experience. I don't usually tend, I'm not real visual, so scrying is hard for me to do. But oddly, my mind started wandering. And as it wandered, this idea came up of wanting to understand where I shine or how I shine. And that made really good sense for me for that Jupiter in Leo. It's just like, and especially looking at, I believe it's the Picatrix image over there that was a common man who had the myrtle wreath
Mhm.
and our myrtle crown, and he had kind of risen up and taken charge of something is how I understood it. Like Picatrix is always so vague and contrast. It always has such a contrast between the words. It's like, this is a fabulous face that's full of woe or something. And it's like, wait, Picatrix, what are you talking about? And so that gave me this idea that he was like this common man who had risen up and said, "Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to lead. I'm going to take charge. Nobody else is doing it. I know what's important here." And so he was able to move forward and engage in the battle that was appropriate for him. And so I think some of that kind of came in to this, like, you know, how can, and especially after Saturn, which is like, follow the rules and do what you're told and all of that. And Jupiter is like, well, if I did have to lead, if I did have to be like express my uniqueness, like what would that be? And what would I be doing? And what would I be leading? And things like that.
And I get the sense too, at least Agrippa's image, at least the way it turned out here, is you've got that Jupiterian sense of leadership, which is, not just, um, how should we say, not just victorious, but just overall influential. And I forget what I was going to say now. But
Not just victorious, but influential.
and but he's still, getting the message fairly quick that this is a position which doesn't come without risk and without some challenge, and that there are, you must, if you want to keep your position, then you need to be able to engage in, well, just an activity of just making sure that no one is plotting behind your back, or you're aware of anything that's happening right there. So I get the sense in that image there that that's a king who's interrogating one of his confidants or part of his court, and where and the courtier is in a position where it's like, well, this guy could cut my head off at any moment now. It looks like he could. So I better be truthful and tell him what I know. So I think, it's Jupiter working both the carrot and the stick.
Another thought I had that I'm not sure I've totally explored yet, but so many crowns in this decan, but for the most part, they're not our golden crown that we saw before, which was more that pure Leo energy, and that like authority of lineage, which might be another good Saturnian thing. It's like you didn't earn it, you just were born into it. Old money, so to speak. And the Jupiterian crowns, which are all these victory wreaths and these wreaths that are earned. Um, and so I thought there was something interesting there. I remember, John, we were talking about there was something in Austin's book you were talking about with a temple to Jupiter. And I was contrasting it with, I know Apollo's temples are temples of um uh where like psychics work or of foretelling the future or granting visions of what's to come and things like that. And that some of the uh, it was common to chew bay leaves, which bay laurel is our crown, that is that crown of victory. And so the chewing bay leaves was something that was supposed to help open up these precognitive type of abilities. What do you remember what the Jupiter temple was about?
That was, I think, as far as I understood it was a way of petitioning Jupiter for further victory, or to at least, or a way of showing that, even though that you were the star of the show, you're not, the top dog in the greater sense of things. You still answer to the gods. And if Jupiter could definitely take um, that victory away from you if you don't show it, particular, or at least the proper amount of respect and reverence that for what he is the victory that he's granted you now. And you said something too earlier about it being an earned victory rather than a victory from a birthright or whatnot. So uh, it places more emphasis on the act than it does the person exactly. I mean, it's taking that persona partial that was so active in the first decan, and it almost takes on its own life here, where the persona is its own entity, and it takes on its own life, and it threatens to overtake the rest of your personality.
You know, I was having an interesting thought when you were doing the little introduction to this section and talked about the victory march around the Colosseum with everybody like applauding and cheering and all of that. And that's what's shown, of course, in the Rider-Waite-Smith Six of Wands that goes with this decan. And it, and I think, there's solar energy, particularly, and I mean, all forms of energy need such an exchange. And the idea of the applause or the cheering or the recognition, um, and there's something about that. I I was always uncomfortable with that, having done a lot of theater and ended up getting a reputation for being ungracious. And having to like kind of come to terms with, you need to be able to accept compliments and accept the accolades that people give to you. And there's something about it's not just the and if you think of it as that warrior, it's like he kept us safe. Like he took care of the enemy and got rid of him, and we're safe now. So we're extraordinarily grateful to this person. And so there's us putting all of our energy towards this person that did something important for us. And that is literally recharging him so that he can go out and do it again, should the need arise. But I also think that there's a little bit of a return energy that comes back from that person receiving it and that reflects back, shines outward. He receives energy, it shines outward and lights the people around him. And so there is there is an energy exchange above and beyond just like showing the gratitude for what the person did, but that shines back out and invigorates everyone. So, and that matches really, I think, matches probably really nicely with a lot of your metaphor you were working with here in terms of the actor, the performer, or something like, or even a politician.
Right. And this is that stage in their career where they've hit the high mark. They've, gotten their breakthrough. So then now that they've become household names and they have become celebrities in a sense. So, they're celebrated for what they've done. Maybe not necessarily who they are, but what they've achieved. And they become, favorites of some people. And anybody else have anything, other comments? Just
This is
to
Raphael.
Sure,
Um,
go ahead.
so I got the image I have. I don't. It's a like a fiery comet crossing a planet. It's either Saturn or Mars. I think it's more of Mars, but that's what I got. I don't know its significance or its meaning, but it was very clear. It's definitely a comet on fire, just going passing by space in front of a Mars, I suppose. So that's it.
Well, that's awesome. And a comet, I think a trying to remember the parts of a comet. I think a comet has a crown as well as the tail, but I could be wrong about that. But
I think
yeah,
you're
they're
right.
showy.
I think you're right. It's called they have coronas,
Yeah, that's what I
like
thought.
solar objects. Okay.
Interesting.
Cool.
Uh, yeah, that's very cool.
And comets are also, I mean, I don't know if this is relevant, but they're one of those objects that are visually, tricky to look at because you get a sense with it having the tail that, it's going in a certain direction, that is indicated by the tail, but that's not the case. It's much more just, the direction the sun is in rather than the way that the actual object is moving.
Oh, that's
Oh, I didn't
interesting.
know that. That's nice.
Yeah, it's because they go on those, like, a lot of comets go on those really long elongated orbits, and it's the tail is just the result of solar radiation blowing off all of that dirty ice.
So that's a really good example then of this kind of showy, possibly uh possibly associated with some kind of augury or forecasting or something,
Yeah,
and that it's dependent on the sun for its effort. That's very interesting. What a great vision to get. That works so well with our decan.
it's again that appearance becoming something greater than just an appearance.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Any other comments before we look at our image to card? Okay, well, again, we're going to stick with Bruno. And compare that with our Six of Wands, the Lord of Victory. I think you were mentioning previously, Joy, that it's a good thing that they have rocks in heaven. Otherwise, what are we going to stand on?
Yeah. I was particularly like curious about this image, and I was like, well, at least there's rocks in heaven and we have something to stand on. Something to support us. Yeah, this is definitely a um very curious image here.
I mean, kind of thinking about the whole, victory parade bit and the stage and the career that's kind of taken place, at least that analogy. I get the sense here that's like, again, there's that sense of constant vigilance that's this, symbolized by the man with the sword and the shield. He's just kind of like hanging back there. It's almost like a bodyguard to the celebrity, making sure that they don't get mobbed or assaulted or anything like that.
Looking at them side by side, it seems as though like she's very unhappy with the outcome. So while the Six of Wands has all these folks celebrating around it, maybe she's not super celebratory in her mood. I don't know. It's just with the two of them combined, that's where I'm thinking.
Interesting, yeah. And somebody says over in the comments, and yet this RWS card is exactly the image your preview comments about the victory parade brought to mind. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah. I had this kind of came up when we were talking about Saturn, and it's coming up again. I remember when in astrology, I learned about the concept of I forget, I think it's called the spear bearer or something like that. But it's the planet that precedes the sun, and it represents how you like kind of come into a room, or kind of how you what your parade looks like basically. And I was discussing it with somebody else in the astrology group, and he had Jupiter as the planet that preceded his sun, and I have Saturn. And he was trying to understand what that meant. And I'm like, well, I have Saturn before my sun. So before I come into a room, it's like a bunch of like men in black with their dark glasses and their little CIA like thing in their ear, like talking to their watches, going, okay, we've checked everything, everything's clear. It's just like, and they're trying to be very low key and not be seen and not be observed, and like clearing everything for me to come in. And then this guy had Jupiter as his spear bearer, whatever it's called. And so it's like, you get all the pomp and circumstance, and you get the band playing, and you get the parade, and you get, all of these elegant um uh like I don't know what it would be called, but people going ahead of you, the nobles or whatever going ahead of you and like making a show, and then you get to enter after all of that. And he was like, yeah, that actually kind of makes sense. So yeah, I think there's a big contrast between that first decan and this decan. Just in terms of the relationship between Saturn and the sun versus Jupiter and the sun. So somebody else says here, the Bruno image is almost too flirtatious with danger to match the tarot. I see what you're saying. Okay, cool. Because there's a little. Are you are you seeing more the threat from the guy with the sword, or she almost has like a fool look to me, but not quite. She looks a little bit crazy with her hands spread out, weird like that. So maybe a fool about to step off the support of that rock. There is kind of a dark indentation, or possibly like collapse, kind of. Her left foot is behind, but if she's stepping forward with the right, then the left would be the next one to move forward, and that could easily end up in that spot, in that indentation or broken off area, which could cause a stumble. So what are you seeing? Both her stepping off and the man with sword. Okay, interesting, interesting. I definitely agree with your assessment. One of the things though that I was thinking with this because of how weird she looks, which is just AI not like able to to show people moving very well. But it brought to mind again, going back to some of the temples, and particularly just because I'm more familiar with the Apollo temples and like the oracles there, it gave me this idea that she was kind of prognosticating or something. And I'm not, I gotta say, I'm not really seeing the threat from the guy with the sword. I can understand that, but I'm not necessarily seeing it myself. That he's more in a guarding or protective capacity, and that he might be keeping the area protected or safe for her to do her whatever her act is, whether it's an act of fortune telling, going with kind of the Apollo Oracle type of thing, or whether she's a performer, an actress, or having to do like a difficult scene that is maybe dangerous, um, something like that.
Or a photo shoot.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So you're including the words, the ready for vengeance. You're right. Okay. You were thinking of vengeance against her, tightrope walking. Yeah, she that does seem kind of like what she might be doing. So Monica, you were thinking of the vengeance against her, and I'm thinking more that he is ready to attack anybody that interferes with her.
Yeah, that's what I kind of got out of the image too, that the guy with the sword is more of a guard rather than a foe.
Yeah, the walking backwards and forwards gives that kind of pacing thing gives that like it does give a very kind of big like big movements, big actions. I'm taking up a lot of space. I'm very dramatic, like, oh no, this is all something something. I'm in trouble, you have to help me. So I don't know, there's some things like that.
Well, I guess we can go on to our next decade since we got some people leaving a little sooner than later, and we'll see if we can get that under our belt.
Yeah, good.
So our third and final decan is ruled by Mars and is known esoterically as the Lord of Valor. This is where one then it ends up in a spirited struggle to defend one place from hostile forces, either from within or from without. With that sustained, with Mars ruling this decan, it's a question of sustained bravery and steadfast heart that allows one to retain the position that was jockeyed for in the first decan. Although in this case, it is regarding to something that's a lot bigger than just one's ego. It's it's just the power to hold the spirit and body together under duress. And sometimes the duress happens as a catalyst for these qualities to emerge rather than being simply there to be appropriate to the situation. Let's see. And we'll go ahead and go through our imagery. Ezra, an ugly black man, laborious, intelligent, with delicacies in his mouth and meat in his hand. Our next image from the Picatrix, a similar one, an old black man and fowl, holding fruit and meat in his mouth and a jug covered with copper in his hand. And this is a face of love and delight and trays and of good fortune. From Agrippa, in the third face ascendeth a young man in whose hand is a whip, and a man very sad and of ill aspect. They signify love and society and the loss of one's right for avoiding strife. From Bruno, we have in the third face is one wearing a leather purse or carrying a whip. He has a sad countenance and is downcast and miserable. Following behind him is a youth dressed in white. Crowley's image is that of a swarthy, hairy man with a drawn sword and shield. And finally, Austin Coppock's image of the banner. And once again, we'll have our 6 images while we contemplate that's empty space for the third decan. And we'll bring it back to discussion.
This is Raphael. Um, so I didn't get a vision for this, but I do want to say like the first two images, I think it's a highly subjective phrasing of putting a black person as being ugly. And so that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. That's all I have to say on that.
That's a good point to mention, and it's also worth noting that the descriptions for those two images were back in the 12th to 11th century, and in a lot of cases, the skin color actually was in reference to the color of the planetary symbolism. So a black person would actually be a symbol for Saturn. So I don't know if there's a particularly, I don't know. It's a tricky question to unravel as to whether there actually is any kind of like, racial discrimination going on in the image description.
Yeah, and somebody wrote in the comments hard agree. And I think that there's definitely just that systemic cultural racism that is endemic to a lot of time periods. I think that it is true that that not all black character, because the idea of a black person even coming up is actually fairly common in these decanic descriptions. And they're not all ugly or fierce. Those are definitely words that come up, and so that is
Well,
relevant, but they're
some of
not
them,
all like that.
yeah, some of them are actually kind of hot.
Yeah, there's quite a variety. And so I think that's one thing to kind of keep in mind, that even though some of the descriptions are negative, there's some that are not negative. And so maybe not, it's maybe a small thing, but it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think the what makes it, I mean, I don't have any background in any of astrology or anything like that, but what makes it significant is that it's it even if black is referring to a planet, um, its depiction, I mean, I don't know that there's an ugly white person somewhere, right? And so that's a very uh anyway, it just the images may be outdated, but I'm just saying that in modern times it's to me it's just very apparent how the systemic is how deep it's rooted. Uh
Yeah,
so anyway, I just wanted to comment on that. That's all.
absolutely.
As far as the analogy with the entertainment industry goes, this is at that, I think, a stage in a career after one has um, established oneself in the industry and is now after they've really hit it big and become incredibly famous. And this is I think a stage where a lot of new talents is coming up and snapping at their heels, and they're having to really just kind of fend off new challenges, or being forced to adapt and adopt and improve, as the case might be, because of prevailing cultural shifts in what people find entertaining. And this is also in the case of the kings that we also were looking at. This is the martial king, the one that's involved in definitely the warmonger, the one who was taking active positive steps to secure uh, the sanctity of the people of his kingdom.
Yeah, and so in our Theoden metaphor, this is where he, gathers his troops and rides to Gondor to fight. Um, and whereas in Helm's Deep he had to protect his people and put them into the keep, um, here's where he's riding off to war. And so we get a really nice progression. And the Jupiter, we didn't talk about this metaphor during the Jupiter Decan, but that's the Jupiter Decan. It would be after they got rid of Wormtongue and sent him off and broke the spell, and he regained his more youthful appearance, and like recognized what was going on in his kingdom, and brought in his wisdom and his abilities to solve problems and that kind of stuff. Of course, pretty much the next thing that happens is he has to put everybody into the keep, which is again Saturnian. But this is him riding off to fight to protect Gondor and coming to the aid of the basically the neighboring kingdom.
Right. So it's more of an offensive gesture rather than a defensive position.
Precisely. And incidentally, for anybody kind of following along, the first decan, using the triplicity rulers, the first decan was ruled by the sun, but the middle decan and last decan are ruled both in both systems by Jupiter and then by Mars, I do believe.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, cool.
I think one of the things too that Austin Coppock talks about in his book when he's talking about this particular decan that let's see. He does emphasize things kind of being at their last tether in a way, or on their, their last lines of defense when it comes to this position of being able to call upon something that's greater than yourself.
Oh, okay. I think I forgot to read the Copic chapters for this time. I'm like, oh, I don't remember that. So I'm gonna have to catch up on those. I read the whole book, but it was so long ago. That makes sense why he chose that banner then. It's like the banner is symbolic of what you're fighting for. It's symbolic of what everybody's putting their energy into. And that, I mean, that kind of makes sense to me.
With that, I think it's also kind of reflected in the images for Agrippa and Bruno, as the guy, the man who's carrying a whip, or like a piece of, it's basically a scourge, which is the weapon of Mars, or at least one of them. And that's that martial tendency of, like, look, we're in pretty strung out shape, but we've got to still keep moving forward. Otherwise, it's not going to pan out well for us. So that's the kind of like, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is, saying, give me five, please.
Yeah. Should we move on to the card?
I think so.
Or does anybody have anything
That's
else they want to add? We don't have a very talkative group this time, it seems like. Well, I guess it's, I don't know. I guess this is about average, actually. I think people are speaking up more, which I like. Uh, and um, and so I don't have to read as many comments.
okay. Well, we'll go ahead and march on to our last card here. Again, we're going to be focusing on Bruno's imagery. And again, we have a nice choreographed dance in the card. So I think one of the gists of it too is being kind of involved in overwhelming circumstances, where we have, in this card called the Lord of Valor, this one person up on the, maintaining the high ground, but under six different competitors rather than just a few. And really, and in contrast to the five, it seems like all the participants are working against one another, when in fact this is kind of almost a concerted team effort on and the antagonist's part. They're all ganging up on this one guy.
Yeah, I have a little story for the three. And we didn't talk about this actually. In the Golden Dawn system, they start the Decanic series with the Leo Decans. So the Five of Wands is the first card in the 36 card cycle. Now we started in Capricorn only because we started in January, and we do that every year. We go January through November, December. And so we weren't following any particular starting place other than the calendar year. But the Golden Dawn starts the decanic cycle in Leo. And so it starts with the Five of Wands and goes all the way around through the Four of Cups. Um, and so the Five of Wands, and so we can think of this as a start of a story. And a story always starts with a conflict. If things are just status quo, there's not too much point to the story. It's like when the conflict happens, that's when the story starts. And so that Five of Wands as our beginning of this cycle is very much that, like, you know, something interrupts your peace or your everyday routines and causes you to need to react or respond. And the way I see those first three cards is that Five of Wands is that conflict that happens, that threat that happens, the thing that like triggers you to take on this journey. You do well dealing with that first threat, and so you get the Six of Wands, which is victory, and that gives you increased confidence to then move forward and not just be like, okay, well, I took care of that. I'm just going to go back to my life. But, maybe other people are having problem with this. Maybe it's this conflict is getting bigger, or there's more behind it than I initially thought. And so now you go on to the Seven of Wands, which is more of that concerted effort to overcome the whatever this is. And so somebody says you can look at the left-hand image as either right before or after the Rider-Waite-Smith card. Yeah, I mean, you're really good at seeing those progressions. Either preparing to defend against the group attack or the aftermath of having seen how much could be against you. Yeah, that makes good sense. I like
It,
that.
it kind of ties in again with those, when we keep talking about King Theoden from Lord of the Rings, and it reminds me of that scene prior to the Battle of Helm's Deep where he's being dressed by one of his attendants, I think, being put into armor, and he has that moment of doubt where he's just kind of like, wondering, it's like, who, he asks, who am I gambling? And his attendant says, you are a king, sire, and do you trust your king? He has, and then there's that little soliloquy that he gives, which is really, one of the songs that was taken out of the book. Um, it's a really, it's a really moving piece of drama. And it really highlights, that whole, the weight of that responsibility that one has for that in that situation.
Yeah, that's nice. And in terms of seeing this progression, yeah, to see that doubt there, and the child could even represent like what's at stake. You've got to protect the not just yourself, not just your soldiers, but you've got to protect those families. You've got to protect that next generation. Of course, there's also the scene of even young children. Well, that's more at the Helm's Deep battle than the Gondor one, but I guess that's what you were talking about, of just even children putting on mail that's too big for them and trying to take on a sword for the first time and things like that. But interesting stuff.
I haven't done a tarot hero's journey for Lord of the Rings yet. I've done it for a couple of other stories, like, for like Star Wars and The Matrix. It's always fun to pick out, some of the archetypes that are in the film, or the story, and then compare them to the card structure and seeing how things, fan out. Because it is true, I guess, with the sequence of the planetary rulerships really beginning in Leo, because I think that was the heliacal rising of the star Sirius, and it marked the more fruitful uh, season of ancient Egypt at the time. It's when the Nile started flooding, and that would be it. It meant that there were good times on the horizon. Where it also meant there was a lot of work that was going to have to be done in order to make that a reality.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the overcoming of difficulties, but at the same time, the taking on of a lot of responsibilities. That actually makes really good sense again with these three decans and that Saturn, Jupiter, Mars thing. Saturn would be that's one of the reasons that this decan feels a little off to me. Some of the food imagery, I think there was a word, I don't remember what the misery was one word. Kind of felt like there's some Saturnian words that were going on, and poverty, misery, lack, are things that are Saturnian. And that goes with the Five of Wands. You don't have anything. And then Jupiter, which is the benefit and abundance of things, but also like that Jupiter as a ruler of Pisces, kind of the gush of that flood of the Nile coming along, which will relieve all of those Saturnian, that lack and hunger and all of that. But then the Mars, it's like, but we have to, be organized and do all of our hard work now to channel the river and plant the crops and maintain that and watch over everything and make sure nothing goes awry. That makes actually really good sense for that Seven of Wands. It's like, I'm on top of it, but there's a lot of things that I have to be watching out for.
It's like the old adage, be careful what you wish for. Sometimes because all of that abundance comes with it, the responsibility of handling that abundance properly and so that it can be enjoyed.
Yeah.
So that was Leo.
It all makes sense in the Wands progression. Yeah. Oh yeah, which culminates with the Ten of Wands. It all makes sense in the Wands progression. Yeah, for sure. Do you have any kind of summary or thing you want to kind of close with, John?
Yeah. You said summary. I thought you meant as in like summer. Well,
It is. It's
it's
supposed to
hot.
be summery, but I don't know about you. I've got such a gray, overcast day. It's not putting me in a Leo mood at all.
I think probably maybe uh I don't really have anything to summarize other than just saying, just keep your eyes to the horizon for when we start doing the rest of these. So like, we're going to do Virgo next month, which of course, it's going to be a completely different bag of bananas. As usually that's what they go to. There's just a really stark contrast in some of these images when you go from sign to sign.
Yeah, yeah. Each sign is so different from the previous sign. Somebody I recently used the phrase, each sign corrects the previous sign. And, as we're trying to like keep a via media, it's just like, you swing this way with Leo, and so then you have to swing back with Virgo, and then you'll swing another way with Libra and so on.
A bit like walking.
Yeah.
It's like, one foot, the other foot, one foot, other foot.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I wish I had, like I said, the weather is kind of draining a little bit of my sunny energy, so it's a little hard to but of course in our three Leo decans, we've got two of the malefics. We have the two malefics as rulers in this sign. And that's kind of, it's actually kind of interesting to think about. It's like, here's the brightest, shiniest, like most optimistic, positive sign, and Mars introduces it, and or Saturn introduces it, and Mars ushers us out of it, and we're just like, please, just let me get to Virgo. We've got some. What do we have next? We've got the sun, and then we've got Venus, and then we've got Mercury, and it's like, that'll just be so much easier. Why was Leo so hard?
Yeah, so almost contradictory in a sense, but it gives you an idea of like, well, at least for me, it underscores the point that these are not simple characteristics that we're trying to nail these archetypes down to. There's quite a lot of undercurrents with a lot of these signs and with a lot of these, it might have, there's certain modus operandi, but there are certain undercurrents and other contradictory types of energies that are fueling that. So where we have that, that friction with Saturn and Mars on either side, and then we have Jupiter on the hump in the middle.
Yeah, it feels a little bipolar. The contrast is so stark. Um, but I guess honestly, that's kind of the sun's journey is, it is, I mean, Leo is when the sun is nice and strong, but it is after the sun's longest day and greatest power, which actually is in Cancer. Um, and um, and it kind of, it kind of we give so many good thoughts and good comments to the sun, and the sun is the most important just in terms of bringing us light and heat and energy every day. Well, not every day here in Seattle, but as a general rule. um, and um, uh, and yet the sun goes through such um, a peak down into such a kind of trough at at Capricorn, and the shortest day, and the lack of heat and the lack of all of those good things that the sun knows is known for. um I mean, there's something about that solar cycle. It's almost as if all of the good words we use to describe it are to like pacify it. And it's like, please don't spend too much time in Capricorn. Please don't spend too much time like making us cold and making it dark. Please be positive for us. Please bring us light. Please bring us the warmth that we need, and so on, and don't overdo it. Leo, the month of Leo can be sometimes so hot. We had that huge heat wave that went through the Midwest and the East. It's like, please don't overdo it. The sun can be quite dangerous. And that Jupiter can increase things. John and I were talking about this earlier before we started. Jupiter in Leo is a really nice energy, and Jupiter follows the path of the ecliptic, which is the sun's path through the sky. It the kind of average path, Jupiter follows it more closely than any other planet, and so it does get a strong relationship to the king, to the sun, which is the king. Jupiter is considered the advisor to the king. And so it really is well placed in Leo. It likes that solar energy, and has the leadership and the authority and the generosity to work well in that energy. And Jupiter rules the fire triplicity by night. Um, but at the same time, Jupiter can increase anything it comes near, and it can make it too hot and, too dry, and kind of augment some of that. So, yeah, it's just really interesting, how much we need the sun and how dangerous it can be as well.
Mm.
Oh, interesting. Somebody says in the movie 2010, Jupiter becomes our second sun. I didn't know that. I'll have to look that movie up. That sounds really interesting.
It's the sequel to 2001.
Oh, okay. Huh.
Arthur C. Clarke wrote a novel that was a sequel for it, and they made a movie out of that, which wasn't nearly quite as grandiose and you know doesn't have the reputation as Stanley Kubrick's outing on there, but yeah,
When did that come out? I've never even heard of it.
it was something I can't remember. It was sometime in the 80s, late
Oh,
80s, I
wow.
think, because there was a big plot in there about now how U.S. and Soviet relationships were really at their worst in the book. Of course, it's like 2010. When did I think the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, so no more Soviet Union anymore. But yeah, the whole deal is I think the whole deal is because of Jupiter's mass and composition makes it almost a star. If it didn't have, I think it's probably if it had like one critical element of something, it would basically ignite and become a star in its own right.
Oh, wow.
It's if it had the right the right conditions.
Hmm. Interesting.
It's probably the reason because it follows so closely to the ecliptic too, because of its it's the largest planet. It's got the largest gravitational field of its kind, and it's something is probably keeping those two gravitational forces in a nice, even locked system.
Hmm. That's almost a way of looking at that Saturn and Mars flanking Jupiter in the planetary sequence of the solar system, as well as, in our decans, just in terms of, yeah, keeping the too much of a good thing at bay. Um, Interesting, interesting, interesting. That's a lot to think about. Okay, are we done?
I think we are. We're right there at the mark.
Very cool, very cool. And well, as always, I've got tons to like ponder and be like, things that make you go, hmm. And so yeah, thank you everybody for coming today and for participating. I know we've lost a couple of people, but thanks to everyone. Um, and we will see you next month for Virgo, beginning of September, whatever the first Saturday in September is.